Morning, everyone.
Good
Good
morning,
morning,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Good Chodesh.
Good Chodesh.
We are learning Mishnah Shabbos, Perek Yudalid, chapter 14, up to Mishnah Dalid, Mishnah 4. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamis Rabinowitz, Shalamis Bas Reb Yaakov Eliezer. Our learning should be an aliyah for her neshama. Okay, Mishnah Dalid. Continuing again with the halachas about which foods you can eat on Shabbos, that you're taking them for medicinal purposes, but since some things it's obvious it's for medicinal purposes, other things it's not. When it's obvious, you're not allowed to do it. When it's not obvious, you could. So here's the next case. One whose teeth hurt him. He's got a toothache. He should not sip vinegar through them. Apparently, vinegar used to reduce the swelling of the gums. So they used to gargle. I don't know, gargle, but swish the vinegar in their mouth and then spit it out. So we say you can't do that because that's obvious that you're doing it for medicinal purposes. But if you want, dip whatever you want that you typically would in vinegar. From nisrapa, and if it helps you, good. Meaning, so as long as it's not obvious that you're doing it for medicinal purposes, even though right now you would not have been dipping your carrots in vinegar, right? But since people do that, and what you're doing right now could appear just like you're eating carrots and vinegar, which is a common thing to do, even though you're doing it because you want the vinegar to take care of your gums, then we say it's permissible to do because it's not obvious that you're doing it for medicinal purposes. Next. B'masnav. Your loins are hurting you. Got that, Richard? You have any loin aches?
Which part of you is the loin?
Yeah.
Your hips.
Right here?
Your hips.
Hips?
Or maybe above your hips. Around the hips. Okay? Best matter, right? Mark, you don't gird your loins?
Gird your loins.
You don't gird your loins?
I don't even know what gird is.
Okay. So if your loins are hurting you, you cannot smear yourself with wine or vinegar, because apparently that's what they did in those days to reduce the pain. But you can use oil to put on yourself. And because people in those days used to smear oil on their skin just to make it soft, not for medicinal purposes. So therefore, again, since by putting on the oil, we're talking about where there's no Shabbos smearing problem here. The oil is loose enough that it's not a problem. And the only issue is, is it obvious that you're doing it for medicinal purposes? And the answer is, if you're using regular oil, since in those days people would use the oil just to soften their skin, it was a skin softener. So even though you're doing it to try to relieve your pain, you'd be allowed to do it. However, you can only do that with regular oil, v'lo shemen vered, but not with rose oil. What's rose oil? Oil in which roses were heated in the sun. I guess that means you used to take oil, throw roses in them, and heat it in the sun. And that was very expensive stuff. So therefore, people do not typically smear themselves with rose oil. So it would be very obvious you're doing it for medicinal purposes. However, b'nei malachim, but princes, nobility, the rich folk, okay, who can afford rose oil just to smear on themselves like you would hand cream, okay? And they would be able to put this rose oil on their wound, because even during the week, it's common for them to use this oil just to smear and to soften their skin. So it comes out now, according to the Tanakama, that again, if you want to use the vinegar for your gums, you can't just take it and swish it around and spit it out. That's obviously for medicinal purposes. But if it happens to be that you're going to dip some food in it as you regularly would and hope that food with the vinegar on it is going to make your gums feel better, you can do that. If your loins hurt you, you cannot smear yourself with things that are obvious that you're doing it for the purpose of healing yourself. People did not smear themselves with wine to soften their skin. That doesn't happen. It doesn't work. So therefore, it's obvious you're doing it for medicinal purposes. But if you're going to go ahead and put olive oil on, which people then put on even without medicinal purposes, just to soften their skin, that's good. However, if it's rose oil and you are not from the people who can typically afford rose oil, and you're using it on your loins, it would be obvious that you're doing it to heal yourself. But if you're b'nei malachim, if you're princely, if you're nobility, where you can afford this kind of thing, therefore you could even put it out on Shabbos for what's bothering you, because again, for you, it's not obvious that you're doing for medicinal purposes. Reb Shimon says, Kol Yisrael b'nei malachim hem. All Jews are princes. What does that mean? That means that the Chachamim did not differentiate. Once you're going to tell me that there are a group of people that would be able to use it, because for them it's not obvious, so the Chachamim said, so everybody can use it. So even though by other people it would be obvious that you are doing it for medicinal purposes, but in this case, the Chachamim didn't apply their decree. Because since there are people who the decree would not apply for, so the Chachamim said it doesn't apply to anybody. The halacha, though, is not like Reb Shimon. And therefore, there is a distinction between someone who could afford the rose oil and someone who can't. Have a wonderful day. Good Chodesh.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.